In the heart of a blizzard, when the world was white and silent, a woman heard a cry that wasn't meant to reach human ears. It was faint, fragile, a sound already nearly swallowed by the storm. But she listened. Some hearts are born not to turn away. This is the story of Willa Hart, a widow with no one left to hold and a baby left to die in the snow. What happened next brought two worlds colliding, one of blood, the other of choice, and neither would ever be the same. The storm came down the mountain like a beast unchained. Willa Hart had weathered winters in Montana that could freeze the breath in a man's chest. But nothing like this. The wind didn't howl, it screamed, wild and furious, rattling the log cabin until the shingles trembled. Trees bent low outside, dragged down by a weight they were never meant to carry. Snow fell not in delicate flakes, but in great sweeping sheets thick as wool and twice as cruel. Willa had just nailed shut the last shutter, her fingers stiff and red with cold, when she heard it. Not the creak of timbers, not the hiss of wind clawing at the eaves. No, the sound was different. A cry, fragile, high-pitched, human. She froze, one hand still gripping the iron nail. For a heartbeat, she thought the storm was playing cruel tricks on her ears. But there it was again, faint, desperate, heartbreakingly real. A baby. Without thinking, Willa grabbed her coat, snatched the lantern, and shoved open the door. The blizzard struck her like a fist. Snow stung her face, and the wind tore at her braids as if it meant to unravel her. Vision was useless, she moved by instinct. The lantern's glow barely reached beyond her boots. 10 paces past the fence line, her foot struck something. Willa dropped to her knees, her pulse hammering. Almost buried in the snow was a small bundle, cloth soaked and frozen stiff, red fabric, faded but unmistakable. Her fingers trembled as she brushed away the ice. The bundle moved. A tiny arm reached weakly toward her. And then came another cry, no louder than a whisper in a graveyard. The child was barely alive. She pulled the baby against her chest, shielding his face with her scarf, her arms forming a wall against the storm. The little body was cold to cold but not yet lost. Willa ran, boots pounding over snow and memory, her breath burning her lungs. Behind her, the wind screamed like it had just lost its prey. Inside, she lit the hearth until it roared, threw every quilt she owned onto the old rocking chair, and laid the baby down. He was no older than 7 or 8 months, male, skin the color of polished walnut. A gash split his temple, blood dried in a jagged, frozen line down his cheek. But it was the cloth that caught her breath, sacred symbols embroidered into the fabric, Kiowa spirals, moons, protective lines, each thread woven by hand. Willa had lived near Kiowa territory all her life. Her late husband Samuel once traded horses with their people before the treaties broke, before the white men brought rifles and fear. Her hands moved on their own now, shaped by years as a midwife and once, long ago, a mother. She laid a damp cloth on his forehead, murmured soft lullabies into the warm firelit air, songs she hadn't sung since her own son slipped into fevered silence and never woke. The baby stirred, a breath, a twitch, a sound like a creek murmuring beneath thick ice, then silence. Willa sat beside the fire the rest of the night, the baby, wrapped in her shawl, rocking slowly in her mother's old chair. Outside, the storm raged without mercy, but inside that cabin, 2 hearts beat together, one weary, one fighting, and the walls cradled them like cupped hands around a fragile flame. She didn't know whose child it was. She didn't know what might come for him. But she knew this. He would not die tonight. Not on her watch. By the second day, the snow had begun to lose its fury, softening into a heavy, aching silence that clung to the land like regret. Willa hadn't left the baby's side. She had no name for him, just little one whispered between sips of broth, and the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in the quiet. His fever had broken before dawn, his flushed skin damp against her shoulder. He clung to her like he'd always known her scent. Tiny fingers curled around her collar as though afraid she'd vanish if he let go. But Willa wasn't going anywhere. That she was boiling water for another cloth when she heard it hoof beats. Just one, not many. She moved fast, tucked the baby into a quilt, laid him gently in a basket near the stove. She opened the door to find a rider moving through the mist of melting snow. The man was gaunt, his face sun-chapped and worn. Tom Jarvis, her nearest neighbor. who lived for miles east and drank enough whiskey to forget he had a wife buried in the cottonwoods. Willa, he called, reining in his horse. You all right? Fine, she replied evenly. Thought I saw tracks near your property yesterday. He said, looked fresh before the storm hit. Likely mine. Tom sniffed, shifted in the saddle. You see anyone out here? Strange. Folk, only strange one I see is you, Tom. He chuckled, but his eyes stayed flat. Word is a Kiowa hunting party vanished last week. Some folks think they were near the ridge. Willa's jaw tightened. This land sees plenty of ghosts, Tom. Don't go adding to them. He nodded once, slow, deliberate, but he didn't leave. His gaze flicked toward the cabin window. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Finally, he turned away. Inside, the baby had stirred. Willa lifted him again, held him close. His eyes dark, wide, impossibly still, looked up at her as if he already knew too much. That night, he cried, not from hunger, not from cold, from fear. She walked soft circles around the room with him in her arms, humming a song she made. Up on the spot, she didn't know when she started singing again, maybe the first night, maybe the second, but the sound had come back to her like water over stone. Worn smooth by grief and time. When dawn broke, Willa changed his bandage. That's when she noticed it, nearly hidden in the folds of cloth, a necklace carved of bone, etched with sun rays and tied with sinew, a charm for protection, a symbol of sacred lineage. And then her breath caught, sewn faintly into the lining of the red blanket was a mark she could not mistake, the crest of the Red Hawk clan. Kiowa nobility. Willa's heart stumbled. She understood what it meant. She wasn't just holding someone's baby, she was holding someone's bloodline, a chief's child, maybe, or a warrior's only son. She glanced out the window. The snow was melting, revealing a land wet with secrets, and secrets never stayed buried in thawing earth. She had taken a child not meant for her world, and someone would come. By late afternoon, the wind had stilled. The sky turned an eerie, brittle blue, the kind of sky that made your bones ache with the feeling that something was coming. Willa moved like someone living on borrowed time. Every breath, every step was deliberate. She boiled more water, cleaned the baby's wounds, rewrapped him in the red blanket, made sure the necklace rested gently on his chest. And then she heard it, not hoofbeats, but a knock. Not at the door, in her mind. What have you done, Willa? She didn't answer the voice. Instead, she went to the rifle hanging above the hearth, took it down, checked the chamber full, ready. She didn't want violence, but she understood it. Her husband had been a soldier. She knew the weight of waiting. That night, she moved the baby into the basket again, tucked him beside the stove, and sat near the door. She didn't sleep. Her hand rested on the rifle stock. Her eyes stayed fixed on the window where shadows outside shifted like breath. Somewhere past midnight, they came. 3 figures, not neighbors, not settlers. They rode without sound. Buffalo hides draped across their shoulders, their faces marked with paint that shimmered like moonlight on water. Their horses made no noise. They moved like fog intent, composed. Willa didn't flinch. One dismounted and crossed the yard, slow and certain. He knelt at the coop, brushed a hand over the snow tracking. Her throat tightened. He'd found the prints, the trail. Then he looked up toward her window and bowed, once, deep. Then he turned and rode off into the trees with the others. No words, no weapons, just a message. We know. Willa exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She walked to the basket, scooped the baby up. He was asleep, cheeks warm, breath steady. She pressed her lips to his forehead and whispered, "They know you're here, little one, and they didn't take you." She wasn't sure if she meant to comfort him or herself. The following day, she heard it again, not silence this time. A roar of hooves, not 3, not 5, hundreds. She stepped onto the porch, baby in her arms. Across the ridge they came like a river of thunder. Warriors mounted tall and silent, their faces unreadable as the sky. At the front him, a red cloak draped over broad shoulders. A scar carved from temple to jaw like lightning had kissed his skin and left its mark. He dismounted alone, walked through the snow without speaking. Willa stood still. The baby stirred in her arms, but didn't cry. When the man reached the bottom of the porch, He spoke, his voice rich, clear. "You saved my son." Willa nodded. "I did. He was not left by mistake. His mother died in the ambush. She wrapped him and hid him beneath a rock. We thought he had gone with her. But you heard him." Willa's voice caught. "I heard him cry." He bowed his head. "You heard my blood scream." Silence passed between them like a vow. Then he asked, "Will you give him back to me?" She didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, she asked, "Will you take him if I say no?" He blinked once, then shook his head. "No, not by force. That is not our way." She looked down at the child who now slept, curled against her chest. "He doesn't cry when I hold him anymore," she whispered. The man stepped closer, not to take the baby, but to touch the boy's foot, gentle, reverent. Then he looked into Willa's eyes. "You are now part of his story." She had no words. His voice hung in the morning like a promise. She held the child tighter, as if her arms alone could hold back the tide of what came next. The warrior turned his head slightly. Another figure broke from the long line of riders. A woman cloaked in deep blue rode through the melting hush, her long braids swinging behind her like river reeds in the wind. Across her saddle lay something sacred, a cradle board woven from willow and sinew, adorned with beads and feathers that shimmered like frozen light caught in motion. She dismounted without a word, her steps soft as falling ash, and began walking the slope toward Willa. In her other hand, she held something small, a necklace made of carved bone and polished shell, strung with the symbol of a hawk in flight. The man stepped forward and took it gently from her fingers. He approached Willa without asking, yet every motion held the weight of ceremony. There was no arrogance in him, only reverence. Slowly, deliberately, he reached beneath the baby's blanket, lifted the old charm from the child's neck, and replaced it with the new one. His voice was solemn. "This is his new name," he said, "a sign of life reborn." Then he looked at her, his gaze steady with something older than time. "And I give you a new name too." Willa blinked. Her voice barely found the shape of the words. "What name is that?" His eyes never left hers. "Mother who hears." The wind paused as if the land itself had leaned in to listen. Willa's throat tightened, her breath catching. No one had called her mother in years, not since the fever took her only son, and she buried that part of her heart in silence and soil. The child stirred again, now cradled against her chest, warm and breathing between her body and that name, Mother who hears. The man nodded and stepped away, and the woman in blue came forward with the cradle board. She held it out, not speaking. Willa hesitated, then took it in hands that trembled. It was beautiful, not in the way of things bought or bartered, but in the way something is when it is made with purpose. It had been crafted for this child. It was a belonging, a promise. The warrior's voice came again, softer this time. "He will go with us at first light." Willa nodded, even as her heart screamed behind her ribs. She already knew. She had known from the moment she heard that cry in the storm. But tonight, for one last night, he was still hers. That night, the cabin held both warmth and unbearable stillness. Willa didn't try to sleep. She sat beside the fire, the baby, her baby, for now resting peacefully in her lap, wrapped in a soft shawl. She watched the flames flicker across the logs and whispered a name to him, the name she would have given if it had been hers to give. "Little Hawk," she said gently, brushing his cheek with her knuckles. "That's what I would have called you." He made no sound, but his lips curved in the ghost of a smile, like he'd heard her from some place beyond sleep. She kissed the crown of his head, rested her chin there, and let the silence fall around them like fresh snowfall, gentle, sorrowful, and wordless. At dawn, no thunder of hooves arrived. Only one rider, the same woman from before, though now she wore no cloak, just a rough shawl and quiet eyes. Willa stepped out onto the porch, the baby tucked against her. The woman dismounted, her gaze calm. "His father waits," she said, "but he does not wish to take him from your hands. That is not our way." Willa swallowed hard, her voice rough. "I suppose I should say something." The woman shook her head. "You already did. When you stepped into the snow." Willa didn't move. Her arms tightened, unwilling to let go. As if sensing her sorrow, the baby shifted, pressing into her chest and whimpering softly, not from fear, not from pain, but from recognition. And Still, she let him go, slowly, steadily. Her arms burned with the ache of parting. The woman said nothing as she mounted again, the child wrapped and held close to her breast. Willa stood at the edge of the porch, her eyes fixed on the red blanket that grew smaller and smaller through the mist. Then, without knowing why, she called out, "Wait." The rider turned, silent. Willa walked back inside, grabbed her old wool coat, slung the cradle board over her shoulder, and stepped off the porch with the steady resolve of someone who no longer questioned her place in the world. "I want to see where he's going," she said simply. The woman nodded once. No questions, no conditions. They rode together, Willa on her stubborn old mule, the Kiowa woman on a chestnut mare that moved like a river over stone. The land softened as they traveled. Snow melted into muddy earth. Sunlight speared through. The clouds, like the valley itself, had finally exhaled. They crossed a half-frozen creek, wound through tall whispering pines, the air thick with old stories. After what felt like hours of silence, the ridge opened into a clearing, and nestled between stone and sky sat a village. It wasn't grand. It wasn't fearsome. It was alive. Children ran barefoot, chasing dogs through the damp grass. Smoke curled from cooking fires where women stirred pots and mended hides. A few young men sat beneath cottonwoods, carving arrows and laughing softly. The air smelled of cedar stew and memories too old for words. At the center of it all, he waited, the man with the red cloak, though now he wore only a simple tunic. His hair was braided, threaded with bone beads. He sat by a fire, low and glowing, his hands open. Still, when he saw them, he rose not with fanfare, but with purpose. The woman dismounted and brought him the child. He took his son in silence, holding him like he held the heartbeat of time itself. The child looked up, blinked, and reached out, his tiny fingers touching the scar on his father's jaw. The warrior's throat moved with a word he didn't speak. Willa stood at the edge of this world, her heart hammering. Then she stepped forward and dismounted. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She looked at him, and her voice came low. "You waited." He nodded. "I wait for what is mine, and I wait for what is sacred." The child rested quietly against his father's chest, calm as still water at dawn. Willa turned to leave, but he stopped her. He held out a small bundle, wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it slowly. Inside lay a pendant, carved bone and turquoise, etched with protection symbols. Its center shaped like a bird in flight. "He will know your name," the man said. Before Willa could answer, the Kiowa woman appeared at her side and laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. "In our tongue," she said, "we do not call you the white woman who saved him. We call you Talshi, who walks between worlds." Willa looked down at the pendant in her hand. Her fingers trembled. She didn't cry, not yet, but something shifted inside her, like a tether pulling tight, a thread binding her to this land, to this child, to this name. Then she whispered, "Tell him, I didn't just save his life." She lifted her gaze to the fire, to the man, to the boy now smiling into his father's beard. "He saved mine." Willa rode home alone. No baby in her arms, no words in her mouth, just the steady beat of hooves and the hush of pine trees watching her pass. The mule moved slower than before. Maybe it sensed the weight she now carried wasn't in her pack, but in her chest. The sky had cleared. Sunlight gleamed off melting snow like broken glass. Somewhere above, a hawk cried. She arrived at the cabin just as dusk painted the land gold. Everything looked the same, roof patch with tin, shutters drawn tight, but nothing felt the same, because Willa wasn't the same. She placed the pendant on the mantel above the fire. Each morning after that, it caught the first shaft of sun and gleamed like a promise. She kept the cradle by the stove, never moved it, never covered it. The faint scent of milk and wool still clung to the fabric, and she let it stay, like a shrine, a memory you can still hold. Each Sunday, she baked 2 loaves of sweet cornbread, one for herself, one for the flat stone near the creek. She never looked back after placing it, but the second loaf was always gone by morning. Days passed, then weeks, then on the 15th day, she heard hooves again. Just 3, no fear, no thunder, just presence. She opened the door before they could knock. The same Kiowa woman stood on her step. No cloak this time, just a shawl and a bundle in her arms. Her eyes were warm, but her voice held weight. He was sick, she said. The wound flared. Fever came. Willa gripped the doorframe. But he lived, the woman added gently. He cried for you. Willa blinked. He said my name, not with words, the woman said softly. But when we removed the red shawl, the one you wrapped him in, he cried until we returned it. He knew your scent. His father said, a child should never have to choose between one love and another. She stepped forward and placed the boy, now stronger, alert, into Willa's arms. He's not here to stay, she said, but he's here to be loved. The child looked up and smiled. Willa dropped to her knees, clutching him like a spark she wouldn't let fade. You came home, she whispered. That night, the Kiowa made camp near her land. 3 tents, 1 fire, no weapons, no message beyond their quiet nearness. Willa brought them stew, water, an old storybook. Even though none of them could read it, she didn't go to talk. She went to be close, to say, silently, you belong. In the morning, they packed their things. This time, when Willa handed the baby back to his father, her heart didn't shatter. She wrapped him in a new shawl, one she had sewn herself, its corner stitched with the image of a small bird. The warrior looked down, saw the stitching, and nodded. Now he has to Winters, he said. 1 in my blood, 1 in yours. He rode off. The boy looked back once, hand reaching toward her. Then they were gone. Spring came fast after that. The snow cracked and vanished. The land softened. Willa lived, not waiting, not mourning, just living. Then one day, tied to her door, she found a ribbon, red, frayed. Attached to it was a carving, a tiny bird, snow beneath its wings. She smiled, and for the first time in years, she sang while baking, because even when silence returned, she was never alone again. Thank you for riding with us through the storm, for listening to the quiet kind of courage that doesn't make the history books, but leaves a mark on the heart. If this story moved you, if you believe that love can bloom even in the coldest winter, then help us keep these tales alive. Like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe. Here at The Wild Steppe, every story is a campfire.